Welcome back to Module 1.2, Building Unity After Trauma. Trauma and unity are two words that should not be used together, but unfortunately, because we are human beings and because we are developing and we haven't arrived, trauma shows up in family. Trauma and abuse, I should say. So we're building unity after abuse and trauma is the result of the abuse. And sometimes trauma stands alone when there's something that transpires in a family. But trauma just means that something has happened to the family that is emotionally overwhelming, which creates hypersensitivity, which creates emotional disconnection, sometimes mental disconnection, fear, responding, and just an inability to cleave and to be connected in a way that is helpful for unity in a family. More specifically, like I stated, we're going to talk about abuse and things that happen in family because of proximity, because of the nature of being connected to people. It is noted that 90-some-odd% of sexual abuse cases happen with people that the victim knows. So in most cases, it does happen in family because of proximity, because of just sometimes generational patterns. Those things show up again, exploration, and we are the victims of one another's lack of development, perversion, or gross morality. It usually happens in the family. And so we're going to look at that because that is, like I stated, a major disruptor of the family unity. And sometimes people never recover from that. And they just either don't talk about it, just hush, hush, hush. Let's not talk about Uncle John, Joe, Bob, whatever his name is. And let's pretend it didn't happen. And then it continues to happen in a family. And so the family has a pseudo connection because there's not a healthy connection of love, support, and protection. And because people are too afraid to leave the system, they stay connected in this dysfunctional, abusive environment. And so I want to give you some tools to help your families, to help the members of your church, and to help the people you might be coaching or you might be in sessions with, and to help yourself, because we can all use some skills in navigating through misfortunes, abuse, and trauma in families. So some of the things that building unity after the trauma or the abuse happens is erecting boundaries. Boundaries, because abuse happens when there is a trespass of boundaries. That's a key element to unity. It is the glue that keeps the family uniquely connected. Boundaries are our friends. Boundaries can be scary, though, because for some people, when they think about boundaries, they feel like there's a gate or there's a wall that is erected and it keeps you from me, and I feel alone and I'm afraid. I need to be able to contact you. I need to be able to touch you. I need to be able to feel you without restriction. And that's really unhealthy, and that's that anxious attachment that we talked about. So boundaries are designed to keep us safe. Now we know that there's rigid boundaries, which are like the walls of Jericho, like you cannot get in. And so that's not what a boundary is supposed to keep people safe, and people can come in safely and leave safely. But if you have rigid boundaries, you have the walls of Jericho, and you're not getting out to touch your family member, and your family member's not getting in to touch you, and we die in isolation. It's called failure to thrive. We need each other so that we can be our best selves and be healthy. We are an organism, and we feed off of one another. And isolation is punishment. That's why they use it as punishment in the jails. That's why when they did experiments, unethical experiments, but they found out that when children are not loved, touched, and caressed, they don't grow properly. So if you just feed a child and direct a child, they're not going to grow healthy. They're going to have a failure to thrive. And in some cases, they couldn't gain weight, and they didn't learn properly, and they were stunted in their growth. So boundaries are not to keep people restricted forever, but it's to control the way you go out and the way they come in. And that's more of a fluid boundary. That's a healthy boundary. And then there's just a boundary where, anything goes, it's inconsistent, and that's not healthy either. So we want to create something that keeps everyone safe. Whenever there's a boundary, you are declaring that something is valuable. And so you want to prevent, if you can, the abuse from happening, or you want to minimize the risk. And then you want to manage the aftercare of the people in your unit so that they can feel safe enough to come back and join together. So boundaries do help people to identify personal space, and it protects unity. It says this family is so valuable that we're going to set some rules so that people are not being hurt, people are not being used, people are not being sexually abused, people are not being disrespected. We're going to protect the value of the family. And when something is valuable, you protect it. You protect your car, you lock it, you protect your ATM card, you protect your identity. Some people have had identity theft, so now you put a lock on your identity because it's important. You have secret code passwords because you don't want anybody into your computer and messing up the things that are valuable. The family is the only entity that usually is not stressed as valuable enough to set protective boundaries around and to communicate those boundaries. And so abuse occurs when it continues, I should say. And it happens when there's no boundaries, and it continues. And let's be honest, children are usually the victims of this abuse, and they don't have the capacity to protect themselves. So the adults have to create boundaries for the children so that they can be safe, and so that you can protect the relationships among the adults, because when adults find out that children have been violated, that causes a disruption. Or the children grow up and then they eventually want to leave the family, or they just repeat the cycle, and you have that dysfunction of lack of boundaries, and people feel objectified and they don't feel like they have anything worth protecting, and it impairs their unity with themselves. So boundaries identify personal space. This is the house that belongs to John and Jill, but we get to visit. Yes, we're family and I feel comfortable here, but respectfully, I understand that this is Jill and Bob's house. I understand that this is Jim and Bob's body and little Bobby's body. So I don't get to touch it whenever I want to. I don't ever try to think that I can have sex with children or introduce any sexual content to children, because that's breaking a boundary. That's a boundary violation. And so other things that happen when boundaries are not in place and trust is broken, these are the trust breakers. Trust breakers happen when boundaries are not upheld. Lies cause a lack of unity and trust. That's a boundary issue. If you don't tell people the truth, then that's a boundary issue. And that causes a lot of trauma, and that there's betrayal. There's been cases where people have found out that maybe they were adopted, maybe they didn't share the same fathers, or maybe someone got a secret inheritance, or maybe anything dark in that way, that there have been some undercurrent inappropriate behavior. And when there's lies, that creates a fragmentation in the system, and you have to rebuild that system with the boundary of, these are the rules. We're going to say, we don't give each other permission to lie. Truth is our boundary. And if you lie, you step outside of the boundaries of our family and of our ability to be safe, because you can't be safe if people aren't telling you the truth, because you're dealing and making decisions based on a lie. And so we talked about it, abuse of any kind, physical, verbal, sexual, those are all boundary violations, because because we're family, we don't get to talk to each other any type of way. We don't get to verbally assault. We don't get to demean and call one another out of our names. That's not the price of being in a family. That's not the price we should have to pay. But in some families, there are no boundaries. You can say whatever you want to say. You can hit people and no one's going to file a police report. You can damage someone, or you can even sexually abuse, and you're going to be talked out of calling the police. And that's a boundary breaker. So we want to be able to know that if there is abuse, I get to build protection by calling the police. And you probably don't even like me saying this, but people need to feel protected, because it's one thing when people get abused, they say, how are you going to call the police when we're family? Well, how are you going to abuse me and we're family? We have to teach people that it's not okay. And sometimes by modeling that, people will know, if I abuse this person or if I steal their property, they may call the police on me because I'm acting outside of our family boundaries. It's funny, I wasn't treating them like a loving family member, but I want them to treat me like a loving family member and look the other way. People become exploitive and take advantage of you and use you for your goods. They may not like you, and they may just want to be around you for what you can give to them. That's not within the boundaries, because within the boundaries there has to be kindness, there has to be respect, there has to be reciprocity, right? You have to not just look to receive something from the relationship, but you have to give something. It's a transformational relationship where everybody may not give the same amount, but they give their very best. So we don't have permission to exploit one another. That breaks down the unity of the family.